I can see lots of people loading in. So good morning again. If you have just joined us, we've got quite a number of people joining us this morning. So just give you a couple of minutes to log in and load up. As we get to 11 o'clock. So we'll start in 1 to 2 minutes time. People still joining in. And Zoe's just joined us. Good morning, Zoe.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late.
Not at all a problem. We've just got an audience joining us. We'll start in absolutely in 1 minute.
Right. Dave, I was going to let you introduce yourself and say a couple of words about what we do at Seco. Is that all right?
Can do, yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Brilliant. So we've still got people joining us. So good morning if you have just joined us. I will, in conscious of time, with 1 minute in, so I will start. So good morning and welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris Cork and I'm the Regional Membership Manager for Make UK, the manufacturers organisation across the Midlands and East of England. So particularly warm welcome to those in that area of the country, but also welcome to everybody else as well. I hope everybody's now familiar with Zoom and this platform. So you do have the chat function that you can use, and we do also have on this a Q&A function. You can see both the bottoms for the buttons for this at the bottom of your screen. So please do take use of them for feedback to us, but also to ask questions of our guests as the session moves on. Additionally, we are recording this morning, so please bear that in mind. We can't hear you if you're in the audience, but I guess that's more of a reflection for our guests this morning. And if you are joining us as a panelist this morning, please keep yourself on mute if you're not presenting. So this session this morning is on the changing nature of work with Make UK and a couple of guests. I guess as COVID-19 restrictions ease across the country, both allowing us to visit the pub or coffee shops outside and perhaps the barbers, depending on your tastes. Many of our members are planning for their staff to return to work and what post-COVID-19 workplaces will look like, following what I think we've all been through and learned in the last year or so. So just as an outline of the agenda for this morning, we'll first be hearing from one of my colleagues in Make UK's HR and legal team, who will be going through kind of considerations and challenges and things that really need to be looking at and planning for now, if you haven't. Then we'll move forward to hear from one of Make UK's Advantages partners, Caboodle, who'll be talking about employee benefits packages and how to be an employer of choice as recruitment and retention becomes more and more prominent in our recovery for the sector moving forward through the year. I've got a couple of questions just saying they may not be able to hear me. Zoe, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Super, and I've got from Lottie, you can hear me fine, so hopefully it's just an issue on your end, but the screen and sound is fine for a few other people. So if you are having trouble with that, apologies, you might want to log out and log back in. Then we'll move to polling, just to reflect on a couple of things we're speaking about, have some reflections from you guys, and also sort of dictate some of the things we can go back to talking about and hear from our guests on. Then we're also delighted to be joined by a Make UK member this morning in Seco Tools. We've got a fantastic double act in terms of their plans moving forward for post-COVID-19 working, but also what's made them a serial award-winning workplace as well. And then we will have an opportunity towards the end for a Q&A as well. and the session will close at 12:30. So hopefully that outlines what we're going to do this morning. As I say, for the first sort of slot in this session, we're going to jump to my colleague Sharon Broughton, who is Head of HR and Legal Commercial Services at Make UK. If you want to share your screen, Sharon, and sort of take us away on considerations for perhaps what we're calling a new normal and changing working practices.
Sorry, I might take myself off mute. So it's a great start, Chris. So thanks, and I wanted to extend a warm welcome to everyone for attending this webinar. I hope you do find this insightful and you're able to take some insight away and back to your own business to apply. So just by way of an introduction, my role within Make UK is head of our HR and legal commercial services offering. So essentially anything people related that my team of HR and legal professionals can support a company with, we provide, from day-to-day technicalities, processes and procedures through to whole-scale change programs and training. My area is obviously developing the offering, having worked as a HR consultant and HR practitioner myself. So I'm always looking for ways to develop our offering to clients. So hopefully, you know, I can take on board some of the feedback and questions and things we go through today to help with that process. So if I wanted to look today in this first session, I'm going to do a session at the start of this webinar and then move on to one at the end of the webinar. So the first session I wanted to look at was changing working practices, as Chris alluded to, as we're moving gradually out of lockdown and hopefully ahead to the 21st of June, all being well. The government advises that people are going to be able to move away from working from home and look at the issues that as employers you'll need to consider when deciding what future working arrangements are going to look like. So clearly approaches are going to be changing from organisation to organisation, as some types of work does lend themselves to home working fairly easily, while others, including many roles in the manufacturing sector, simply cannot be performed away from the workplace. However, where employers are considering making the temporary home working arrangements that applied during the COVID-19 pandemic more permanent, the potential issues and considerations that need to be taken into account are critical to the success of any such change. Although a lot of data and a lot of our clients have said that employees, where they can, want to remain home working, there'll always be those who want to return to the office or may need to once business processes and interactions become more office focused, even if it's only for part of their working time. And we can't talk about this subject without also making sure that those who cannot work from home or have been working on site during this time are considered in any plans and longer term changes. So during this session, we're going to look at these questions and some of the areas that need to be considered. Then more specifically, we're going to look at policies and procedures in the next session on this webinar and what particular changes need to be considered in your policies and procedures. So what changes might be needed to home working arrangements to make them sustainable for the long term? So as we said, home working arrangements that were introduced at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic may have been as simple as employees taking home their laptops and plugging them in on whatever surface was available to them. Such ad hoc setups may have worked well enough as temporary measures, but if home working is going to become more permanent, employees should look to address a number of issues from the outset. So not least so employees know what is expected of them, but also so related policies and procedures can be updated, amended or introduced accordingly, and line managers trained on their parameters. So alongside the practical considerations around things like health and safety, home working, costs and equipment, and relevant insurances, although some areas may seem obvious in that you need to consider for home working, it's really imperative that working practices and parameters are reviewed and decisions taken and communicated exactly to employees what the business position is. So firstly, I think the main one that most people will be thinking about for home working is current working hours. So During the height of the pandemic, caring responsibilities, whether that was children at home or other caring responsibilities, were likely accepted as workable during home working time. You may have given leeway once children were back at school for pick-up and drop-offs to still take place, and working hours sort of accommodated to reflect this. Client or customers may have been happy with a more flexible approach and availability. But as we move more and more away from the restrictions that force these approaches, as a business, you're going to need to make a decision for home workers if contractual is under the same set of parameters as it would have been if they were in the office, i.e. working within set working hours, or whether that can be delivered flexibly to suit other childcare or personal responsibilities. You also need to consider your client and customers and whether their internal or external needs have changed, and if so, how best can these be managed? One of the things that was raised on a recent roundtable event with members was, is working hours even a thing anymore? Or have you seen that with home working and the added flexibility that this brings, the increased productivity levels? So as long as contractual weekly hours are met across the week, set working hours are unnecessary, and therefore, does an individual even need to put a flexible working request in to change their hours if there isn't actually a set pattern of working hours? You may think this is obvious in your business, but would you be happy for home working to be a substitute for childcare, given what may have been allowed during the height of the pandemic? I've heard a number of employers asking the question and saying that employees have said, oh, that's great, I can work from home, I don't need to arrange childcare in nursery or things like that, or wraparound care. That obviously does need to be something you need to consider and potentially address formally, whether that's documented contractually or in your relevant policy. If you need to consider if that's a change in approach and you're going to allow a more relaxed approach to requests to implement or replace with a hybrid working policy which covers these areas. So you may currently have a flexible working policy, but is that going to be sufficient moving forward, or do you need something more particular to cover these unique working arrangements? Maybe that would be called a hybrid working policy, or some people have just kind of said working from home is the new norm. So looking at the next lot of scenarios and issues that you'll need to consider, again, some of these might seem silly to mention around home working and particularly dress code. It may not have been an area you'd considered, but depending on the role in question, the types of interactions that an individual may have, as a business, you're going to need to be clear if there are any expectations around the dress code, as you may have had previously with client interactions. Would this just be for external client or customer interactions, or for video call meetings? And what specifically will the expectations be? Will it be an extension of your existing uniform policy to include calls? I think we've all probably sat with maybe a smart top and pajama bottoms on, or jogging bottoms, but moving forward, what's the expectation? Is it just a case of you need a smart shirt for men? Is a tie required? All of those things need to be considered, and obviously that specifically will relate to the type of customers and clients the individual's dealing with and their daily interactions. Obviously, the home working office location and setup is another key area that you'll need to consider. Previously, obviously, the home working location and setup may, as we said at the start of this session, just have been the kitchen table with the laptop placed on the kitchen table and all manner of home activity happening around that individual. But the business may have also provided office equipment, and it may have provided office equipment or may not during this period. There may have been display screen equipment assessments done at home, distractions assessed. But if that's not the case, as you move forward, these requirements will need to be reset and reconfirmed formally, regardless of what the decision on these points are. The main point to note on this is obviously if somebody is working from home the majority of their time, the company will potentially need to support the employee with the provision of equipment and meeting health and safety requirement. Potentially, this could result in some people being unable to work from home, so that you apply your policies consistently. And also, you need to consider the contractual considerations of this. They'll need to be defined. So will the home become the place of work, and therefore then allow the individual to claim expenses from their home address? Although you may think some of these considerations are obvious, with all HR and legal related issues, unless those expectations are documented and clearly understood by all employees and the managers dealing with any breach or fallout as a result is always going to be much more difficult and complicated to deal with. I think the main point here is there's a clear link to productivity and employee engagement when employees are clear on the expectations required of them. So you may also want to consider involving employee rep groups or undertaking an employee survey to inform some of this decision making. So finally, just wanted to look at the interplay between the home and office workers. This is an area that I'm not sure everyone may have considered when people are looking to move back into the office, or those who've had to work throughout the pandemic. So if you're looking at the previous decisions that we've talked about, if they're going to be workable, you need to be clear whether each role is purely a home working role or not. So if people have the option to work in the office, will colleagues in similar roles working solely from the office as well? So if someone chooses to work from home, but other colleagues choose to work from the office, how do you have consistency of approach? Will there be flexibility on working hours and fitting in other commitments? But then what's the quid pro quo with the person who works in the office? Given we're in the manufacturing sector, and therefore most organisations will have both office and frontline workers, operational workers, the other side of the coin is ensuring all your frontline employees remain engaged when they see any resulting flexibility and changes on offer for those individuals that are working from home. They won't have the option potentially, or they'll definitely not have the option to nip out and pick up the kids, or have the flexibility on their working hours of when they make a specific part for an aeroplane or a specific tool. You know, they clearly have to do that within set working hours. Coming up after myself, as Chris mentioned, Caboodle, a Make UK Benefits partner, is going to be exploring reward and recognition options that could be a consideration in this position to obviously give something back to those individuals that don't have this flexibility. We'll also be hearing from one of Make UK's member companies, Seco, who will be taking us through their approach and what has worked well for them and their employees. So hopefully there'll be some insight there into what you can look at as options as well. Fuller details of what we've talked about today and the considerations for changing working practices can be found in a checklist document that you'll receive following this session, and also contact details for myself and the team if you wanted to talk through anything in more detail. So I'll pass back now to Chris to take us through to the next session.
Brilliant, thank you, Sharon. It is, as you say, well worth reiterating. This is absolutely what a member's doing with their office staff, as we all know that the vast majority of sites have remained open throughout the whole of the pandemic, and of course a large number of production staff are of course required to come into site and make the fantastic things that the sector does. If I can just ask you to stop sharing your screen, Sharon. We'll move on to hearing from one of our Advantages partners, Caboodle. And we wanted to hear from Caboodle largely because we've seen over the last year what we've all learned from our own personal circumstances, both in work and out of work. But I think we've all had a bit of a reconsideration of what we want from a work-life balance. We also know that within the sector, recruitment and retention will be a growing factor, not least the wider factor of skills, which has been something of focus for the sector for a long, long time. How do we keep people? How do we address those work-life balances? And I think through some of the things in terms of the benefits packages for employees can certainly address some of those things that Sharon's referred to. So Steve, if you'd like to share your screen and kind of take us through some of the things you're seeing in the market, from a client point of view across all sectors, but of course within manufacturing as well, in terms of some of those benefits that you guys provide.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Hi everybody, I'm Steve Lapham. I am Key Account Manager at Caboodle Technology. Who we have been a benefits provider since 2009. Just started off as just doing schemes, sort of cycle to work, technology vouchers, but soon expanded our business into fully benefits platforms. Our platforms can be catered for businesses of all shapes and sizes, and we add them as modular benefits to what is required by the company. What I'm going to be here to discuss today is just a few of the benefits that we found have helped businesses during the course of the pandemic, and also as well what we feel will be helpful as we return to the new normal and get back into the offices on a whole. Some of the benefits I will touch on today. You've got the Cycle to Work scheme. We've got a technology voucher scheme, reward and recognition, and lifestyle benefits as well.
Can I just jump in very quickly, Steve? Can you just pop
Sure.
your slides in present mode? I think it might be easier for those joining us to see your slides. We can see them, but it's just in PowerPoint. If it's F5 or the little present button, which I can't see.
Let's try.
There we are, then from current slide.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Right, thanks.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, I'll focus on Cycle to Work scheme, technology vouchers, reward and recognition, and lifestyle benefits as well. So Cycle to Work scheme, as I'm sure all of you are aware, has been massive during the course, well, not only for the last year, but since its inception. Over the course of the last year, it's been invaluable, particularly for those key workers who have not been so keen to use public transport and getting a safe way of getting back and forth to work. We envisage that not only is it going to be popular in the past, but as people are returning into work, they're going to be looking at alternative ways of getting into the office that not only keeps them safe from any sort of infections, but also as well looking at the greener aspect of it as well. So the Cycle to Work scheme, for those of you that don't know, is a hire scheme that was set up by the government to encourage people to look at alternatives of getting to work via bicycle. The scheme itself is, as I said, a hire scheme whereby employees can get a bike and pay for it over the course of a 12-month hire period, whereby they save on their tax and national insurance contributions. Employers in turn as well will receive a bit of a return on investment there as well, because they will save on 13.8% on their national insurance contributions. The scheme itself used to be capped at £1,000 for the employees to get a bike. However, the government did change those caps around about 18 months ago, which took that cap away, and employers can set their own limits dependent on their workforce, what they feel is corporately responsible as well in terms of lending to their employees, and gives them the opportunity to get a bike that's suitable for the day-to-day commute. With this as well, I mean, obviously employees can spread the cost of the payment of the bikes over the course of a 12-month period. It also encourages sort of fitness and well-being for the staff as well, so it helps reduce absenteeism. So obviously the savings are available are there for all to see. And of course, if it's avoiding public transport and avoiding that close to close contact with people when they're out and about on the journey to work, then that all helps as well. In terms of technology, so we found in particular that this scheme has been massively popular over the course of the last 12 months. mainly because people realise that the technology has not been up to the standard that they require, either for the kids to learn at home, or for people to be able to work and go about their day-to-day activities. So the technology voucher scheme, it works in a similar way to the cycle to work scheme, in that you as an employer would offer the employees a loan in order to go out and purchase the latest technology. It's a good employee retention tool as well, because if employees know that they're paying off some technology over the course of a 12-month period, or they know they can gain access to it again over the course of the next 12 months, then it's a good way of encouraging them to stay with the business and offer those sorts of benefits as well. With the technology scheme as well, it offers them an interest-free loan essentially to purchase the tech. The scheme itself, they get a Currys PC World voucher at the end of it, whereby they can go and choose the technology that they require. So we've, as I said before, we've found that people are buying laptops, tablets, and smart devices, all in order to help not only the kids but also themselves in their day-to-day working life. Obviously, again, you can set your own limits as to what the loan rates are. Obviously, things like to bear in mind is employees' salaries, and making sure that you're not alienating them by putting in a maximum cap, which is not affordable for them really. But again, the cost is spread over a period of time. Employees don't have to go through any credit checks. There's a calculator on the system as well, whereby they can see what effect it will have on their salaries. The only difference between this and the cycle to work scheme is that there are unfortunately no tax savings to be had on this one. This one did used to be able to, but the government, following austerity a few years back, took that away. In terms of reward and recognition, again, this has been a mainstay for a lot of companies over the course of the last 12 months, trying to keep engaged with people working from home, but also as well rewarding and recognising those key workers that are going back and forth to work. So we've got numerous ways in which we can do this. We can either do it through peer-to-peer recognition, just through the simplicity of personal or professional cards that employees send to one another, but also as well through management, monetary and non-monetary recognition as well. So it's all about improving productivity, improving morale, and making sure that people aren't forgotten for the efforts that they put in, both now and in the future as well. Sort of things that we've got available. So we've got non-monetary rewards, financial rewards, and peer-to-peer recognition. The thing that we think is most beneficial from the rewards and recognition packages is that obviously there's improved retention of staff, loyalty as well is improved, as well as increased productivity. The sort of non-monetary rewards that you can give. So if you haven't got a budget, for example, to give out as monetary rewards, a few ideas. I mean, most people have been working with their pet anyway for the last 12, 14 months or so. So probably not something that you want to encourage again at this point. People will be glad to get away from the dogs and the kids as well, for that matter. But there's all sorts of things that you can do to be inventive when it comes to non-monetary rewards, and they're just as valuable as monetary rewards. So giving people some time back, take half a day's leave or an additional day's leave on top of what they normally get. If they hit certain KPIs or performance levels, it's just a nice way of being able to recognise somebody, without having to set aside any monetary budget to do so. For those of you with monetary budgets, we can do this for you as well. So this could be done from all sorts of levels, from long service awards to Star of the Week, Employee of the Month, etc. Just recognising people for outstanding contribution to the business, and making sure that that employees are happy and engaged as well. We've had a few companies as well using this sort of similar system for gifting, particularly over the course of Christmas. We had a lot of people getting in touch with us about being able to gift their employees a voucher over the course of the Christmas period, so that they can recognise all of the hard work that they've done during the course of the year. With the peer-to-peer recognition cards as well. So this is a non-monetary potential reward. This is a way to not only engage staff and to bring them back on bring them onto your benefits platform, but also as well for them to engage with each other. So whether or not it's a personal recognition, it could be anything from a birthday to a birth of a child to moving house. They can be done on the personal side of it, but on the professional side as well. You can link the cards into your company values and recognise staff just as a thank you, really, for work that they've put in during the course of a given period of time. Just a few examples of the sort of things that you can send out with the cards as well. You can attach a personal message for them as well, just to personalise it and make sure that people are being recognised, and it's not just an automated system that's being activated. The additional of a personal message that you can send through is just as valuable as sending out a monetary reward or non-monetary as well. And it's just a nice little gesture to thank somebody for their hard work, whether that be personal or on a professional level. Finally, as well, we've got a range of benefits that we've got under our lifestyle benefits. So these range from retail discounts, e-voucher codes, to money off holidays and other benefits as well. So our instant discounts are available on our platform, which enables employees to voluntarily go into the site and gain discounts off cards for various retailers. So obviously you've got all of the shops reopening at the moment. With this as well, you can use them online as well as in store. But it's just a nice way of giving something back to employees as well, whereby they could. And this doesn't have to go through payroll or anything like that. It's purely voluntary benefit that's available to staff, so that they can go about their day-to-day purchases and make their salaries go that little bit further as well. On the other side as well, obviously we've got the cinemas opening soon. We've got packages that allow employees to gain discounts off cinemas. I know that Odeon have announced recently that they'll be opening from the 17th of May. So we envisage this one picking up massively over the course of the next few months, and again just helping those employees to make their money go that little bit further from their monthly salaries. I probably wouldn't normally touch on lifestyle benefits. However, I think a big important thing is getting away. If being locked up inside your house for the last 12-14 months has taught you anything, then it's good to get away and get a bit of travel in. Obviously, bit of uncertainty over the overseas travel this year, but within the lifestyle benefits as well, we've got lots of discounts available for staycations. Sorry, I hate that word. I can't believe I said it. But if you're holidaying within the UK, there's some really good benefits available through the lifestyle benefits as well, that will allow you to get discounts off. Particularly ho seasons has been massively popular, both last year when we were allowed out, and again we've seen a massive trend towards these money off offers during the course of the last few months as well. And I'll finish off there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. And I know certain members will definitely be looking at kind of rewards and recognitions given the busy period or difficult period we've all had over the last 12 months. There's been a couple of technical questions in the chat. If I could just ask you to read back through and answer those, but I would like to move to a poll before we move to our next speaker in terms of our member double act. Who'll be able to tie up some of the considerations in terms of how return to work will look like, but also you know, how to be a successful workplace and award-winning workplace as well. But we'll launch our poll to kind of get some feedback and hopefully share some insight with everybody on the call this morning around sort of plans at the moment, and see where we are up to with that. But I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes while we hopefully fill those in. All answers are anonymous, so don't worry about that. And then we'll be able to share the results with everybody on the call. So we're about halfway through in terms of number of answers, but I think the last half are stealing in now, and we'll share the results in just a second. And give 10 or 15 more seconds. Okay. And 1-2 seconds if you're just filling in. Super. So thank you to everybody that's filled in our poll. Looking at the results, hopefully you can see the shared results on your screen, but if you're not, I'll quickly run through them to hopefully give you the insight if you cannot see them on your screen. So how confident are you in your business's preparations for a post-COVID-19 workplace? We're seeing a large majority are either somewhat confident or very confident, which is really encouraging. And to be honest, quite a very small minority indeed that are very unconfident, but there's around 13% there that's got a way to go in terms of their planning. As restrictions are eased in terms of workplace practices, quite an even split, but around 37% are mainly looking at employer-driven, flexible or hybrid working, and then 36% are looking at employee-driven, flexible hybrid working, but definitely hybrid working coming out as something that's a strategic way forward for most, and a small handful are undecided, and then it's a few are also saying they'll decide on a case-by-case basis, and a small minority are also going to return to pre-COVID arrangements altogether at 14%. Interestingly, do you have a plan in place for how to consult employees on seeking their agreement to such changes? Almost 50-50 split, yes, 52%, no, 48%. So perhaps when we come to you towards the end, Sharon, we can maybe address how you could perhaps go about consulting with employees. Do you have flexible home working policies that are robust and fair? The vast majority saying yes at 71%, but 29% saying no. Have you considered cybersecurity for home workers? 3/4 saying yes. I think you'll have seen Make UK's report earlier this week that shows that 50% of manufacturers have been attacked by a cyber criminal in the last 12 months. That's good to see that the vast majority are covered for such things. Are you intending to, or have already made changes to employee contracts for new starters or even in current employees? The majority, almost just over 2/3, saying no, but 1/3 have changed contracts. Very interesting again to see almost 50-50 split on reviewing holiday expenses and travel policies. 51% yes, 49% no. Have you considered or implemented new employee benefits or initiatives? 1/4 have done so, 3/4 haven't. And then some questions in regards to whether you want to follow up with some of the things we've discussed from Make UK and also with Caboodle as well. So thank you very much for answering the poll. Hopefully that gives a bit of an insight into where members are up to between each other, but also that's great feedback for us. And as I say, or have alluded to, we've got our fantastic double act, and I know Zoe and Dave will love me for saying that, and we've got a fantastic duo because not only have they won awards at Seco Tools for being a workplace of choice, they've also won one for employee wellbeing within the 2020 and 2021. And also we've got Zoe from a HR perspective, who's absolutely put a lot of this together for Seco, but also Dave from a different area of the business, but well part of the management team. So it's interesting to get that kind of perspective from both sides of that HR fence, as it were. But I don't know if you want to share your screen, Zoe, with the green button at the bottom, and obviously more than welcome to introduce what Seco do and some of the things that you're thinking about doing moving forward and have done to be a great workplace.
Thank you, Chris. What a build-up that was, gosh. So just help me out and let me know what you can see on the screen. Are you seeing Dave or are you seeing the slide deck?
I can see the slide deck. If you can just go into presentation, that'd be great.
How about that now?
Super, that's great.
So you're just seeing the main slide, or are you seeing the notes and the next slide too?
I can see Seco Tools and introducing yourself and Dave.
Perfect. My goodness, this technology is so stressful, isn't it? I knew I shouldn't have had 2 screens. It was just too much to ask for. Good morning, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's really nice to be invited to come and speak. And yes, I have brought my partner in crime with me. Dave has been really instrumental in some of this work that we're doing. So I'm delighted to have his support today. My name's Zoe Wood. I'm the HR manager at Seco Tools, and we're based in Ulster, Warwickshire. And Dave, do you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about what Seco does?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Dave Magnall, Innovation Partnership Manager for Seco Tools UK. I think, as it says in the box, we're one of the world's largest providers of metal cutting solutions in the industry. We're a company of over 4,000 globally, headquartered in Sweden. Zoe and I work for the UK subsidiary, although also have global input as well. And across all those countries, we're linked by a common set of values of family spirit, passion for customers, and personal commitment. And it's that first core value, that family spirit, that pretty much drives everything that we do. A lot of the work that Zoe's worked on, we both sit in a great place to work team, which we're going to touch on as well. And also the mental health first aid team as well, which is something that we've seen more and more, a more drive or need towards going through these tough times.
Fabulous, thanks Dave. So I've just got a little slide somewhere. How about that? On some of the things that we've seen that have been important to us about the future of working, and these are kinds of more I guess global trends or national trends that we're seeing that are coming to the forefront. During the COVID and the pandemic, there's obviously we've allowed people to work in a really kind of high trust culture, in that they've not necessarily been in the workplace, they've not been micromanaged. We've been able to set people targets based on delivery rather than turning up to work and doing your hours. And I'm getting a feeling back from our employees that this is the kind of way that they would like to continue to work in the future. So that's something that I think we need to work within. The second thing that we've been trying to work with as a kind of concept within Seco is that we're going to try to treat our employees more as adults. I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago, we had some really bad flooding locally in and around the office. And I remember all of our employees kind of getting their little noses pressed up to the window, looking to see how bad it was and whether or not the bosses, you know, the manager, the managing director would come out and say, yes, it's okay, you can go home now. And that kind of, you know, allowing people to make their own decisions is something that I think we need to move more towards for our employees. So this year, when it's been bad weather and it's been snowy, we've just kind of given an instruction, you know, you go home when you feel you need to and you're comfortable. And if you can log on and work back at home, then do so. And just talk to your local manager. If you're operating a machine and you've got a project that needs to finish, is there someone else that can take care of that for you? And just allowing people to take more responsibility for those kinds of decisions. It's tough. It's hard to do, to give away that kind of control, that's for sure. The third one I just want to touch on is this kind of the human side of leadership that we've started to see throughout the COVID crisis. For example, I'm here with my cat. Thanks for bringing that up earlier. But we've had meetings where, you know, people's kids have come in. I'm sure you all remember that famous BBC interview where the guy was interrupted by his children coming in, and that was on national television. So we've started to get deeper relationships with our employees by seeing their houses, by seeing their kids, by seeing that they do have a human side and that they're kind of able to drop this work face. So that's been really interesting and I think a step in the right direction. And then finally, something that we're trying to work on, but it's also tough, is to shift our thinking that subconsciously we think that if someone is working from home, they're not doing real work. And this is something that seems to be a little bit ingrained in us, because whenever you used to have someone say, oh, I'm working from home, it was you know, they were waiting for the freezer to be delivered or something. But we're getting a bit of a push now from people to say that not just do I want to work from home, but actually I'd like to be able to work from anywhere. People have been coming back from COVID saying that they've really rethought about what they've wanted to do with their life. And some people are saying, actually, I need to spend more time with my family. I want to be able to work from different countries so that I can, in the future, you know, visit my daughters in France and still work for Seco, but just in a virtual way. So these are some of the things that we've been trying to think about and plan for the future. So I'm just going to talk a little bit here about how we've been working with this culture of high trust and what it has given to us at the end. And I would like to actually thank Make UK for putting this idea into our heads. About three or 4 years ago, not quite sure how long, we got invited to an event which was being hosted by Cooper Parry, which is an accountancy firm. And they've got the most fabulous offices, so that was great to go to. But they also talked a lot about what they were doing with employee engagement and how they were working in this high trust culture. So that is what planted the idea that actually we think Seco is a great place to work, but we don't actually tell anybody about it. It was really a really well-kept secret. And this has enabled us to really shout about it and get some recognition. So this is just a little bit of a slide that I've got here around what I presented to our employees about why we should go for it. We'd already been working with employee engagement, as I'm sure most of you do, and we did an employee engagement survey twice a year. And the question we asked is that enough? Is it enough for me to ask you twice a year what you think about, you know, about Seco, about working for us, and for you to hear your voice? Obviously it's not, is it? I mean, everyone's going to say that. Secondly, we wanted to work with this organisation called Great Place to Work for a couple of reasons. The first was that one of our global strategies is that we wanted to be recognised as a great place to work. And this organisation just so happened to have the same title. So that was really great for me, because then I could say, well, yes, we are a certified great place to work. But secondly, it's because it's a global organisation, and we are also a global organisation. So I had a dream that we would be the pilot, and then all of the rest of the world would follow us, and we would all become great places to work. We're still working on that, but I haven't given up yet. Maybe it will happen. Then finally, one of the other reasons we're interested in this particular workplace is because it is actually enabling us to benchmark ourselves against the best employers in the UK. When I spoke to the project manager, she said it's quite common not to get in on your first attempts, and that they have very few engineering and manufacturing organisations represented. So I've just got a bit of a plea to the people listening to this call. You know, if you're involved in engineering and manufacturing, I do feel we have a little bit of a responsibility to each other to make this an attractive career choice for young people coming in. And one of the things that they look for when choosing a career is that there's going to be a great company culture, and that it's an organisation or an industry that they can relate to. And kids today, they're not necessarily looking in the same places that you and I did when we were looking for work. And it's not necessarily enough to do that just because your parents did or you've got an uncle that did. They're also looking on social media. They want to be inspired by stories. And this is one of the ways in which you can really get your name out there and promote this as a great industry to work for. So come and join us, sure.
Zoe, I think that the other advantage to this is that the criteria that you've got to sort of go through and meet to be accredited as a great place to work is a real sort of opportunity to hold a mirror up to yourself as an organisation. You know, there's some very exacting criteria across all aspects of the business, and you've got to really sort of take the time and go and speak to pretty much all your employees and all your team, and you uncover some real insights onto things that you're probably doing great and some things that you're not doing great at all. So it's a real opportunity to reflect on yourselves as a business, to find out where your strengths are and also where your weaknesses are.
Yeah, Dave, you're absolutely right. Because it's not just about, you know, achieving the award. It's about getting, you know, making the journey to get there. And sometimes that does involve holding the mirror up, like you say, reflecting a lot on what do we do great and actually what can we improve on. Yeah, one of the other things that they offer to us is best practice. So, you know, they for example, would give us some advice or some support around different types of ways of working, flexible working, what other companies are doing that's great about maternity policies to enable us to continue to grow. And then this next little point, which is around trust. This is something that I feel has changed massively recently. You know, in the old days when you used to book a holiday or something, for example, you would go on to you would go to a travel agent and you would look in the brochure. But nowadays you go to TripAdvisor and you're looking for some evidence that other people like you have been on that holiday and it's going to be great. And you don't just want to see the brochure, you want to see photos that real people have taken. And I think that also relates to work. When you see a company advertising, you want to find out from the employees that work there if it really is a great place to be. And that's why this award's so fabulous as well. And then this is what you were saying, Dave, really, that our employees are surveyed, and the majority of the accreditation is based on what our employees think. So it's all very well for HR to say, oh, we've got these great policies and everybody loves them. But if the people don't feel it, then they won't answer that in the survey. And that's what the award is really capturing here. How do people feel when they work for your organisation? And then, like we said before, it's not just about getting this as a badge. It's a learning journey, and every year you need to continue to grow, because those best workplaces that you're comparing against, you know, they're there, and every year you need to try to stay up with them. So it is quite hard work for sure, but I love it. this is fun. This is a bit of an example of what you can do with your employer branding now. So this is on the Great Place to Work website, and Dave, we're so thrilled about this now, aren't we? This year's award. Yeah. So the first year we entered, we got 43rd best workplace, and this year we've gone up a massive 10 ranking points. So it's absolutely incredible. We're so pleased about that, and it's actually down to a group of people that Dave is a member of, the Great Place to Work team, which is led by this guy here in his fancy dress, John McGee. He's our team leader. And what's really interesting about this team is that it's not an HR team. It's a group of employees representative from the whole organisation. So they really make a difference. And then I just got one more slide, which is a little bit of some pictures of some of the stuff that we have tried to do to work on employee engagement. Dave, I bet you've been at most of those events, haven't you?
I would imagine so, yeah. I mean,
maybe not the moonwalk, which was for breast cancer. I think that was a group of ladies that did that one. Yeah, but we try to really involve people in events that we've got going on. There's a couple of things that I'm sure all of you will have done. Things like working with your company values, doing employee engagement awards, nominating people that have done a great job, celebrating in a great way in front of the whole organisation those people that have really made a difference to your business. Dave commented on it earlier. We've also got a mental health first aider group. It's about 10% of our employees are registered now as that. They've done some yoga, some coffee days, some time to talk. We got involved in some community action days. We've given everybody one day a year in which they can give something back to the community after this kind of pandemic. And then Chris, you asked me a question, which is what's next for us. And a couple of things came to my mind, which I'm sure are common with your members, is that we want to do some more work around diversity and inclusion, and sustainability seem to be kind of hot topics for right now. And people looking for places to go and work are definitely looking for those kinds of things to be communicated in the employer branding that's out there. So I think that's us. I think I probably talked too long. I'm sorry about that. I'm so passionate about this.
No, not at all. I think before handing over to sort of Dave for some other reflections, I just wanted to know, and I think members would be keen to know, those on the call that are maybe starting out from scratch. I think there's a couple of fantastic examples in the chat of other accreditations, but if you are starting from scratch, what are the kind of quick wins, and where do you start?
Yeah, for us really, the first place we started was our annual employee engagement survey, and we were getting some really great results in that. So we started to look at those areas where we needed to do a bit more and to focus on. And I think one of the things that we've learned from this is HR do a really great job, but sometimes we don't tell everybody about it. So what's been really useful for us is to do some kind of you said we did. So when we get the results from the survey, we then go back to people and say, you asked us for this, and this is what we've done, or you asked us for this, and it's not possible for these reasons. And sometimes that just brings it into people's mind that we are actually listening to what they say. And then the following year, you'd be amazed at the difference in the question, is anything going to happen as a result of this survey? Which is usually no. So hopefully it would be yes.
I mean, the survey is anonymous as well, isn't it, Zoe? And
it is, yeah.
With that anonymity brings some brutal honesty from your employees, because there's no, I know people are often in organisations scared of speaking their mind because of fear of repercussion. No matter how much you create this environment of trust and everybody's free to say, their piece, there's always that fear from employees in a business, and that anonymity just allows people just to be, and I would say brutally honest in some respects, aren't they, Zoe? They don't hold back, and you need that feedback as an organisation. You really do. It's no good just people just ticking a box and saying it's great all the time, because we never move forward. Landscape's changing rapidly, and we have to sort of listen to people and adapt to that, and that gives us great opportunity and a voice. So I guess that's the start point, isn't it? Talk to your organisation, talk to your people. Find out what they really think and feel about where they work.
Yeah, and maybe set up a little project team, group of people outside of HR, because they can sometimes be your greatest ambassadors.
Yeah, we have
question,
representatives. Really. Oh, sorry, Chris.
No, that was going to be my last question, really. I think you may have answered it. One of the main things we hear across a whole range of objectives within our member companies is how do you get management team, how do you get other people across a whole range of things, but obviously this time it's HR to be involved and get them on board. And it might be interesting to hear from your perspective, Dave.
How do we get management in HR? I think we're quite lucky in the fact that we've got a very sort of proactive and close to the workforce HR team, very passionate about this. I don't know, how did we get involved? It felt like it all came together quite easily, really. I think we all want an input into the way that we work and the way that we engage. You know, like Zoe said, we want to be treated like adults and not just be told what to do in a workplace. And I think we have a culture or an environment through Great Place to Work where that happens, and people willingly engage with it because it's a voice from across the company and a broad spread. People want that opportunity to have a voice and to feel like they're making a difference. I don't know, it's a bit, I don't know, I was just asked if I wanted to participate, and it's a bit of a no-brainer for me.
I think a willing volunteer is worth two people that have been persuaded, really, aren't they? If you ask people, would anyone like to join this team, and you get a group that say yes, they're going to be passionate about it, they're going to be excited, and they're going to take other people on that journey. Whereas if perhaps you nominate a group of people to work on this, you're not going to get that same feeling and excitement.
Yeah.
Even better if you can give them some money to spend, Chris.
And there's no hierarchy in the team either. That's the thing. You know, John, who leads the team, he doesn't sit on the senior management team. He doesn't sit in a management position as such. But John leads up that team on behalf of the company. Yeah. So it's sort of role and responsibility goes out the window when it comes to we're all sat there as equals, just trying to make the company a much better place to work.
Brilliant, and conscious of time, but thank you very much for sharing. We'll hopefully come back to a little bit of this with some of the questions we've had. But if I can ask you to stop sharing your screen, Zoe, and then we'll jump back to Sharon, who will be able to kind of wrap up some of the things we've discussed, and actually kind of reflect on how do we consult with staff on the changes we're going to make, but also what are perhaps contracts and employment, what do they need to look like, and how do you go about that moving forward if you do to edit. So fantastic, Sharon. If I ask you to put it in presentation mode and then hand over to you.
Okay, thanks Zoe and Dave. That was really insightful. It was really interesting hearing from firsthand from your experiences and all the insights that you've delivered, specific, like you say, the insights that you've received from employee surveys. You can't put a number or anything on the detail you get from an employee survey. A lot of companies will try and put in place changes and implement different strategies for the business, thinking it's the right thing to do, but actually the best starting point is, as you said, Zoe, just getting that insight and then checking back in and making sure the employees are engaged in that process. While Zoe and Dave and Steve were talking, I've also answered a few of your questions. So I've tried to answer as many as possible whilst also obviously listening to what everyone was saying. So if there's any left over, Chris, I'll take those offline at the end, and hopefully, Chris, you can just share a Q&A document as well, because there's quite a few questions on there, some of which I feel like I could write 100 lines to answer, but actually it's probably easier if I just pick those up separately and give a full response, if that's okay. So just moving on to the next section, this was just picking up points that I think Zoe, Steve and Dave all kind of alluded to in terms of policy and procedural considerations. So if following on logically from the topics that we covered in the earlier session around the decisions that you need to make facilitating changing working practices, a lot of people have already started asking questions about whether they need to amend flexible working policies, if people are working part from home, part from the office, do you need a hybrid working policy, and all manner of other considerations. So hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about in this next session will give you a bit of food for thought, but obviously, like I said before, I will try and answer some of the questions that you've posed that are specific to you in a bit more detail as well. So in practice, obviously, the majority of working practices, policies, procedures, manuals are going to need a relook, refresh, or even a complete overhaul as a result of the pandemic. And when we did the polling question earlier, it looked like a lot of you had probably already started on that process of thinking what things need to be changes, what things need to be reflected. The main thing really about this is without these changes, it's going to be really difficult to be fair and consistent when you're managing your employees, because clearly if it's not set out in detail within policies, procedures, contracts, what expectations are, it's very difficult to then obviously manage employees that you feel may have breached those details. So we're going to obviously cover those decisions in this section and also talk around communication and training for managers and employees, again, to make sure they completely understand what the expectations are for them. So firstly, contractual changes. A couple of people in the questions have asked this around home working and what to include. But I think the other thing to consider as well is whether you should make changes generally to your employment contract for new starters. Yes, you might be thinking about current employees, but you may also just want to think about other issues that have occurred during the pandemic. For example, do we want to talk about employees' place of work and a contractual requirement to work from home if instructed? So, we are talking about flexibility in home working, but for some people, they will work in the office. But if we're in the unfortunate situation where we find ourselves in another lockdown, fingers crossed that never ever happens again, what do you do? Were you contractually obliged to send people to work from home, and will that be acceptable? So, you may want to consider that. The other area to consider as well is the hours of work and redeployment to other positions or mobility when we talk about the percentage between working from home and working from the office. Also, this may seem like a little bit of a negative position, but if you don't currently have a layoff or a short-time working provision within your contract, do you want to potentially look at including that? That may just be for new starters, so you don't need to go through a formal consultation process with existing employees. So it means you're more flexible to respond to sudden reductions in business. The other thing within contracts as well is obviously around your holiday notification provisions. So again, people planning for holidays, like I think Steve alluded to, we all just want to get away, whether that's the UK or abroad, depending on what the government decide. We also maybe need to consider the requirement for employees to inform us of overseas travel destinations. Do you want to look to discourage travel to the quarantine list countries, but obviously subject to any kind of reasonable exceptions that people may have? Do you want to include in your contract any compulsory vaccination clauses? This is quite a contentious issue, whether an organisation can require employees to have a vaccination, but again, that's obviously a business decision for you if you feel that's appropriate for the type of work that you undertake. On that same point, any medical clauses that you have within your contract, sending people to occupational health or other kind of medical requirements that are important for the line of business you work in, do you need to revisit those in light of obviously what we've currently been seeing around COVID-19. The other thing as well is regular testing. We are in a bit of a limbo situation about how long that's going to continue, but again, is it worth a clause in your contract around that? And also maybe even temperature checks. Some of the companies on this call may have details in there about drug and alcohol testing. Is it reasonable to put something in around COVID-19? I think just picking up on one of the points around changes to contracts in the Q&A section, some of these changes and a lot of the changes we talk about are going to require collective consultation to implement. So that obviously depends on the nature of the change and obviously the numbers that are going to be impacted. But the key thing here is obviously if you do have to go through that collective or the consultation route, it's going to impact the timeline when these changes can be implemented. So obviously if you're thinking about that now, which it looks like a lot of you are, from the polling questions, it just means you're ahead of the game. The other key documentation that's going to have been impacted by the pandemic are your general policies and procedures, and especially as working practices start to change. So the main thing I'd say with all your policies is around meetings and hearings, and what specifically it states within your policies around meeting, hearing, location and arrangements. So is it okay for them to be held remotely, and if so, what specific arrangements are you going to make for your attendees and the representatives? So you know, any preparation time, how you're going to share notes with each other. You may have already been working in this way during the pandemic, but I think it's really important to make reference to this in your policies, especially when you're dealing with contentious issues. So, you know, unfortunately, issues around disciplinary grievance and whistleblowing, they're all pretty contentious, and clearly you don't want questions and concerns raised about how the hearing's going to be heard, whether virtual's okay or not. The other area in your disciplinary policy that I think is the sort of second most key area to look at is the definitions of misconduct and gross misconduct. We need to ensure that they're broad enough to cover employee breaches. So the other areas that probably have reared their head in business during this pandemic is you know, things like refusing to adhere to social distancing within the workplace, attending after receiving a positive test or receiving self-isolation instruction, refusing to leave work when displaying symptoms, breaches of rules outside of work that you feel may jeopardize your safe workplace, lateral flow testing and any refusals around that, and just general insubordination. And although your disciplinary policy is there, and it's reasonable to have broader categories by which these new issues within the pandemic should be covered, it's also important to just check that you're happy that they would fall under that, and actually your employees understand what their expectations and requirements are, and that managers know how to manage these. So you may find that there's not much change you need to make other than just communication around expectation within that misconduct and gross misconduct category. Oops. Move on to the next slide. So the next one that I think you'll all obviously think is high on the list around policies is obviously your absence and attendant management policies. They're clearly going to have changed in light of the pandemic. So you need to give some consideration to be clear to employees, for example, that they mustn't attend the workplace if they're required to self-isolate, and they must inform you of the self-isolation requirement as soon as possible. You know, is that documented anywhere? If someone were to pick that up, if they were facing disciplinary action as a result. Have you particularly looked at trigger thresholds and whether you wish to disregard some or all COVID-related absence? Will you discount absence due to vaccine side effects? And what's your position on company sick pay for COVID-related absence? And is it properly reflected in your policy documentation? Do you need to make amendments to notification and evidential requirements? And in relation, I think this is one that a lot of companies have mentioned to me in various different roundtable events and discussion, is the issue of long-term sickness, so long COVID and shielding. So how do you plan to deal with that? Will that just be dealt with as part of your long-term sick policy, or will you have specific details within there around long COVID and obviously any kind of shielding implications for individuals? Another area which we talk around and which is quite important is obviously the data protection considerations. So if you've been managing and monitoring COVID-related absences, are you comfortable that you've been doing this in a fair and non-discriminatory way? Have you been collecting data when employees have been away from work for a COVID-related reason? And if so, this is likely to be special category data under data protection law, because it could obviously reveal something about an employee's health, and therefore, do you need to audit the data you've collected to date to ensure that it's appropriate ordinary and special legal basis for you processing this data, and if you do actually need to keep it. And obviously entirely linked to that is your data protection documentation broad enough to cover this collection of data. I think most of you will be aware that we've got our data protection, GDPR templates for HR that do actually address COVID-related absence data. They've recently been updated, and you can get those via our website as well. So it's worth having a look at those if you've not maybe made those changes. In terms of flexible working policies, I think this is the area that most of the questions have been around that, and obviously home working practicalities with desks and computer equipment. Will you look at changing those? So in terms of your standard flexible working policy, are you going to continue to limit only those with 26 weeks service? Are you only going to allow one request within 12 months? Will you maybe go down the route of maybe what Zoe and Dave were alluding to, that flexible by default, so the job might be flexible unless the employer has a good reason to designate them otherwise? Could you maybe have something in there about flexibility in the short term? So maybe having a pattern of 3 months and then return to your prior working pattern to balance any specific shielding or childcare needs that some of you may have. Will we have a shorter application process? This is one of the questions that was raised on the Q&A section around whether you should allow managers to deal with individual requests beyond the initial flexible working on a case-by-case basis, or whether it should go through your formal flexible working process. Would you then have a shorter process or implement a separate hybrid working policy that deals with the smaller nuances of individual requests? And I suppose the key area for flexible working is what you will look at for grounds of refusal. So clearly, and I'm sure Zoe, you'll know this one, is it's really difficult to refuse someone's flexible working request when they've been working from home probably for the last kind of almost a year in some cases, because from in their position it's already been tested. So it's really important that you're very clear about the grounds of refusal, and obviously if you feel that it could work but there's some improvements that are needed, that's clearly detailed. And finally on this piece, I think again picking up the point that obviously everyone's going to get away somewhere hopefully this year, whether that's in the UK or abroad. Do you need to review your holiday and travel policies? So when leisure time is possible, will employees need to notify you of any overseas travel destinations? Have you considered how you'll handle employees needing longer time off to accommodate any requirement to quarantine when they return from overseas? Again, something that you'll need to make a business decision how you're going to handle that, and obviously document accordingly. I think obviously we're talking about policies and procedures, and that's all very well, and then it's all the kind of black and white documentation piece that we're talking about, but I think the piece that really needs to be addressed and that maybe people might have forgotten about is obviously bringing people back to work, whether that is working from home or whether that's back into the office, and obviously their resulting well-being. So have you considered sort of running induction or re-induction for new recruits and employees returning to the workplace? So whether that's kind of reorientation or a re-induction process, things like applicable safety and social distancing measures in the workplace, Do you need to refresh training for employees who've previously been trained but may have been on furlough for a considerable period of time? Also, data security in the context of the increase in home working. So do people need refresher training around that as part of that reorientation or reintroduction? Have you got rules around video conferencing and the use of staff's own devices to ensure that obviously personal data and confidential information is disposed of securely at home? And then if you have employees on furlough during the pandemic, but you now need to return them, how are you going to communicate this to them? Have you considered how you're going to handle employees who say they're unable to return from furlough because maybe they've got caring responsibilities or they're concerned about contracting COVID-19 in the workplace? Obviously, these concerns and anxieties need to be considered and discussed to ensure the individual's well-being. Thinking about home workers though, and obviously if you're deciding as a business that people can continue to work from home, some home workers may find it difficult to maintain appropriate boundaries between their work and their home life, and this may increase their risk of stress. I think I've heard a lot of talk around presenteeism, whether that's in the workplace or just generally from work, so people don't call in sick because there's no reason to, because they're working from home, or they're concerned that they may be part of the next round of redundancy. So all of that is really important to measure. And home workers may just feel isolated and they're missing the social aspect. And managers are going to find that difficult potentially to pick up the signs that employees are struggling, if they're struggling with stress and anxiety. They also need to consider what they can do to mitigate risk and ensure home workers feel properly supported. It may also be difficult when people work remotely for managers to accurately evaluate their performance. So employers should consider how they will ensure performance is properly assessed over time and any issues are promptly addressed. You may wish to even reserve the right to end an employee's home working arrangements and require them to return to work at the workplace in the event that performance falls below expectations. You know, might sound quite harsh, but it may actually be the intervention the employee needs to just move on from whatever's causing them the concern with their performance or stress or anxiety. So final point today is, and I think we've touched on this, is whether your managers need training on the various areas we've covered today. So that's whether that's refresher training, for example, on managing flexible and home working requests, and obviously clearly how to do that fairly, or retraining on the requirements and expectations that will be communicated and documented to staff. This final piece is really critical in ensuring that your changes that you made are implemented and managed fairly. And further details of this checklist of considerations can be found in the document that we'll share after this webinar, and there'll be links to the related guidance, so you can look at that in context. And I think just finally picking up on the point from Zoe and Dave about employee engagement and taking people on that journey, I think people don't like that phrase. I don't think if employees come on the change journey, but I think it's important to just recognise that, you know, employee engagement is just essentially the employee's view of the organisation and how they feel they're nurtured and respected, and it's a two-way relationship, their employment, so they feel that they're empowered to perform because they're kept in the loop of what the business is doing, and return their opinion is valued and it's sought where appropriate. So clearly in any kind of change scenario, that open and transparent communication is critical, both from the outset and a legal point of view. So I think the main thing from my perspective, from a HR and legal point of view, is that you only tend to find that conflict arises where there's a lack of communication, or communication isn't two-way and transparent, and that results in distrust from both sides. And that's where you tend to find that people do, you know, take formal litigation, put in tribunal claims or whatever that might be. And I know that's a real negative end point, but I think, you know, the key is really just to keep your staff engaged. Then I've just put this final slide on here because it's just a really good strategic consideration when you're looking at these changes, and this document with all the details of each of the points will be shared with you, so you can read around each of these points. But I just thought it was useful to end the session with this, because obviously some of the areas I've covered today do require a lot of planning and obviously putting in place the change. And I think as long as you keep these considerations in your mind when you're planning that change, it'll stand you in good stead. I think sort of Zoe and Dave have definitely ticked all these boxes when they've been talking around the work that they've undertaken. So we'll share this with you separately, so you can actually refer to that as well. And then finally, I just thought there was a few upcoming events that might be of interest, especially around the topics we've covered. So there's a webinar around redundancies in the context of COVID-19. So obviously, again, that covers considerations when you're thinking of unfortunately any redundancy process and procedures. IR35, potentially not quite linked to what I've discussed, but I know it's a key consideration for a lot of people as we speak. And then the final one that has been covered in quite in detail today is the GDPR considerations, and we've specifically updated this webinar to reflect COVID considerations. So again, one that you may find useful. So just passing back to Chris. Hopefully that's covered everything that everyone expected, but I could see there was a lot of questions coming through, Chris, while I was talking, so I'm sure there'll be more to answer.
Brilliant, thank you, Sharon. There's a lot there, and I think lots to take in and consider. Conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left, so one other event to put on your radar for the proportion of people that hadn't got cybersecurity cover for their home workers, we are also running events on that next week on the 12th. Details of all the events and things we've referred to will be shared post this webinar. Very quickly, to put you on the spot, Sharon, we might not have an answer, but we can always definitely take the feedback on board. Will we be amending our template policies to look at hybrid working on our kind of Make UK resources and website?
We at the moment we've got guidance on what to consider and what to include, but it is actually something that we are looking at producing as part of our standard pack. So yes, we will be putting a hybrid working policy in our standard pack, because presently we've got the standard flexible working policy, and we've got the guidance on what to consider around flexible and hybrid working, but we will be putting a template in there as well.
Brilliant. So watch this space, I think Kirsty and Tracy in the chat. And very finally, we do have a couple of questions on the Q&A. We will be able to follow up with them specifically. Sharon has answered a lot via text, so please do scan your answers before we close the session in a couple of minutes. But I want to end on two questions or themes of questions, Sharon, which you covered, but to readdress in terms of reluctant returners, those that have been at home, really don't want to come back to the workplace. How do businesses deal with them? And very similarly, if an employee puts in a working from home request and the employer wants to deny it, how do you go about dealing with those two things? They've been a theme of quite a number of questions.
Okay, so I suppose taking the flexible working request one, obviously, in terms of dealing with that, I would hope you've got your flexible working policy in place anyway, which should set out the process to follow in terms of dealing with that request. If it's specifically in relation to COVID, you'll need to have your sort of business case detail in place and considered as a business approach early on in that, because obviously an individual may have put a request in for flexible working in relation to, I don't know, the fact they're working from home presently and they want to continue to do so. If as a business you want to refuse that, obviously you'll follow your formal process. But as I alluded to earlier, it's not going to be quite as straightforward in meeting the threshold to refuse that as it previously may have been prior to the COVID pandemic, because someone, I'm assuming with the flexible working request, may have been working in that way presently. So as a business, you're going to need to consider what reasons you're giving for refusing that request. Without a bit more detail, it's difficult to maybe give a steer, Chris, on that. I'm not sure if it's within the questions and I can give a better response to that.
Super. But I guess we've only got 2 minutes, so I guess maybe we can follow up with all those questions, and as I say, we'll be able to share the checklist and some of our other resources highly relevant for members planning and members on the calls planning. I guess conscious of time, so thank you very much for everybody for joining us this morning as we creep into the afternoon, and a big thank you to our guests joining us, Steve from Caboodle, Zoe and Dave from Seco Tools, and of course Sharon and myself from Make UK. So thank you very much. We have also recorded, so we'll also be able to share that with everybody on the call, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.